Okay, guys, thanks for your patience.
Rick has joined us now, Rick.
Hear what people have to say about your choice here. I thought it was a great one. So I want to just say thanks again for tuning in for the second of a two-run season, Take Five season.
Mr. McCauley.
It's it's been a heck of a year, I'll say that. And those of you who've been teaching full-time know what I'm talking about, I think. But I'm also really grateful to Verby, to Katie, to Hugh, to Cliff for their participation, especially for Katie, Verby, and Hugh for taking on presentations. Some really good ones at that. I also want to say that we plan to be back next year in rare form. Well, not rare form, actually typical form. Back with,
This is rare form.
yeah, this is rare form.
That'd be great.
Back with our regular sessions. We're still in conversation about the theme. I've got a good idea and I'm not yet ready to unveil it, but once we assemble the theme, the panelists, then we'll be letting people know. So that'll probably be sometime in September when you'll get an email blast or a postcard talking about it. But I will give you a hint that the theme is going to be dealing with an anniversary of sorts, a centennial of sorts. So if you want to go back to your almanacs and start looking at things that happened 100 years ago, that might give you an indication. But as more people start to click on, see a couple of new faces, some familiar faces. Boy, it's nice to see you all. And thanks again for tuning in.
For the depression, right?
I hope you've had a chance to see Verby's presentation. If not, I don't think our discussion here will necessarily ruin it. So you can always go back later on and watch it. But if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind going first. I'm kind of double booked this evening. My oldest boy has his first baseball game of the season, and I'm the assistant coach. And he may or may not be pitching, so he may need to be there a little early to warm up a bit. The head coach, I should say, is Matthew Guy, and if you were there for the Take Five season 2 years ago for the Frontier theme, he was one of our panelists for that, and his son and my son are good friends, and so they're on the same baseball team. So I'm going to start first, and if I need to click off around 6:30 or 6:35, I hope you'll just keep the conversation going as long as you can. But Verby, thanks again for choosing Lanterns. It was a heck of a read. It was an easy read, of course. It was fast. At the same time, boy, was it jam-packed. And I got to thinking about a number of things. I was thankful to learn about a number of figures, some of them obscure, some of them from her hometown there of Bennettsville, South Carolina, that you'd never know about without this memoir. Ms. T and Miss Amy, and their stiff backbones. You get to learn a little bit about some other figures who are kind of on the margins of the civil rights movement, at least in terms of public acknowledgement. They don't have the notoriety of Martin Luther King Jr. or Medgar Evers maybe, but people like Fannie Lou Hamer, who really show the kind of grassroots work of the civil rights movement of the 60s. As an English professor, I was also thinking about this as an autobiography. And I guess maybe there is a difference between a memoir and an autobiography. But to the extent that this is an autobiography, it got me to thinking about just how innovative it is. I'm not a big reader in the genre. And when I think of kind of famous autobiographies that really kind of play with our expectations or that have made their mark in this genre, the one that comes to mind, and this I think reflects a lot of my area of specialization of early 20th century American literature, that would be the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas, which is actually written by her longtime partner, Gertrude Stein. And it really is about Gertrude Stein, or really about their friendship and their relationship. But she's taking on the role of her partner, and taking on her voice. This one does something different, but I think it's equally innovative, where we're getting an autobiography, but it's really an autobiography of other people. Or, I mean, it's not a biography, and we get to know Marian Wright Edelman through other people. And there's a lot of humility in that, because we learn as much or more about these other people as we do about her, or rather what we learn about her is so embedded in the lives and work of these other people. And it shows a real level of humility there. But, you know, to kind of deflect and show your personal story through so many other people like that, to my mind, and again, I'm not a big reader in the autobiography genre, but this seems to be pretty new and pretty innovative, what she's doing by letting us know her through her associations with other people, some of them very famous, others fairly obscure. But I learned about so many different people, and well, you know, especially as we're talking about the Black Lives Matter movement, in the current day, you can really start to see the parallels and the way in which, gosh, the violence that so many of the people showcased in this memoir went through, the fear of violence. We're seeing these things play themselves over again today. That's what I have to say. Katie, how about you?
I found this book so touching, that the vivid depiction of so many people with no resources to accomplish so much. And her good-heartedness and single-mindedness, and her faith and her trust that their efforts would bear fruit, and that they would, that the majority, excuse me, would find a place in their heart for them, and that she could help to bring that about. I felt sorry that I don't think she did bring it about, at least, and she may never see it come to fruition. But I was touched by the single-mindedness and the goodwill of her effort. It was extraordinary.
Yeah.
The thing I like best about the memoir is that it celebrates ordinary people. Every other memoir history of the civil rights movement that I've read has been a roll call of famous people. Medgar Evers, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, John Lewis, Rosa Parks. But Edelman understands that the most important mentors in everyone's life are the admirable people we see every day. She calls them natural daily mentors. And the lessons we learn from them are about how to live our lives every day. The first and most important of these are our parents, so those are the first that Edelman mentions. From her parents, she learned self-respect and respect for others, steadiness and dependability, cooperation and common sense, the value of persistence and hard work. The Black parents of her formative years, about 1940 to 1960, knew that they had a hard job. They had to give their children a secure, loving foundation on which to build their lives, knowing that they would grow up in a society in which they would not be secure in many places, would not be loved by many people. Her mother taught her how to get along with other people by including her in her daily activities and in the groups she organized and participated in as a pastor's wife. Sunday school classes, charitable church groups, Girl Scouts, ladies' teas, sewing circles, work teams, family and community celebrations, and occasions of mourning. Following her around and participating in her activities, her daughters learned how to cook, sew, do laundry, and keep house, how to work cooperatively with others, how to fill their days unselfishly and constructively. Edelman's parents placed high value on education, but many respected members of her community had little or none. Many of them nevertheless functioned as mentors to her. Her parents taught her that to be unlettered, as she puts it, was not to be unwise or unworthy. These mentors were members of the community that children could visit anytime they liked, sharing their food, joining them in work or play. She mentions Mrs. Teresa Kelly, Ms. T, whose house she loved to visit, joining in housework in the laundry she did for white people, and then the delicious meals she prepared in a house with no electricity, like so many in Edelman's community. From this woman with no formal education, she learned lessons of kindness, generosity, patience, and faith. Miss T feared nothing because she believed that all that happened to her was according to God's will. Edelman writes also of Miss Lucy, Miss Kate, and Miss Amy, equally unlettered, but very influential in her life, who taught her the power of unconditional love, the pleasure of a beautiful garden, the duty of providing for the poor, and the value of humble daily work. Although they were unlettered and obscure, Edelman calls Miss T, Miss Lucy, and Miss Kate great women, and she's right. All our lives depend mostly on good people who are not famous, but great nevertheless in their character and their achievements. Edelman's parents taught her to accord high respect to everyone who earned it by showing diligence, integrity, consistency, and helpfulness. Edelman emphasizes that she had as many mentors as she had neighbors. Everywhere I went, there were eyes watching me and people reporting on me when I strayed into places or company or engaged in behavior they knew or thought my parents would not approve. She wishes that we could restore this kind of community caring for Black children who must grow up to face a hostile, segregated world. All children need adults who believe in them and expect them to achieve, who love them, and whom they love so much that they live up to their expectations of success. I especially appreciated this statement because I've always believed that the main thing children need to succeed is attachment to adults who love them and show it by spending as much time with them as possible. Most importantly, these everyday mentors taught Edelman and her peers not to settle for less than they had deserved by their efforts and never to give up in the struggle for equality. They had courage and they taught it to the children. One of my favorite ordinary mentors mentioned in the book is Fannie Lou Hamer, and Aaron just mentioned her too. The 20th child of poor Mississippi sharecroppers, and such an inveterate demonstrator for civil rights that Lyndon Johnson once said of her, "Someone stop that illiterate woman." I was titillated by Johnson calling someone else illiterate. Jailed, beaten, and threatened with death, she never stopped preaching love for whites and equal rights for Blacks. When times were especially hard, she would start singing, and she taught other demonstrators to build up their courage with freedom songs. Verby has been kind enough to call up one of my favorites, "I Woke Up This Morning with My Mind Stayed on Freedom," and this is Fannie Lou Hamer herself singing it. You'll notice she's lining the song. She's saying the verses before they come up so that others will know what comes next. That was called lining.
Okay, and we're going to try this. I'm not sure it's going to work because the one recording I was able to get, I'm working a little on it, but we'll try. And you're going to have to wait just a moment till we get it going here.
Want a lawn that looks
With
like
the
this? Well, your lawn looks a little
ads
bit
that we
like
hope
this.
we can shut
Click
off.
right here and check out TrueGreen for the local lawn experts.
Okay. Here.
Woke up this morning with my mind stay on freedom. Oh, I woke up this morning with my mind stay on freedom. Oh, I woke up this morning with my mind stay on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Talking, walking and talking with my mind. Stay on freedom. Oh, walking and talking with my mind. Stay on freedom. Walking and talking with my mind. Stay on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Singing and praying with my mind. Stay on freedom. Oh, singing and praying with my mind. Lord, 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 stay
Thank you, Verby. No, that's good.
That's wonderful.
It is part of an album called Songs My Mother Taught Me. And the whole album is
Oh.
fascinating.
There it is.
You know, it seems like what we're discussing is ordinary people doing extraordinary things.
Yep.
The unfortunate thing is, it's always in retrospect that we recognize the extraordinariness.
Oh, goodness. I clicked off.
No, you're on. You're
No, you're
fine.
We can still see you, Katie.
I can't see y'all. I don't know what I.
Well, you're there and we can hear you and see you.
Well, dadgummit. Hmm.
Yeah, Irv, I'll just second that.
I
Ms.
got
T, I think, was one of my favorite people in the whole book. Ms. T.
Mhm.
Yeah.
She was wonderful.
Cliff, how about you? What were your reactions?
Well, the political culmination of the memoir was the Democratic Party convention in August 1968. And I don't think any of us will ever forget all of the riots, the disorder, the uncertainty. But this led me to set up a brief timeline for the entire year of 1968, which I think is one of the most consequential years, certainly in my life. The Tet Offensive in Vietnam began in January, late January, and continued until September. And all of a sudden, we went from a notion that we were at least holding our own in Vietnam. We were all of a sudden on the defensive. We came very close to losing Saigon. The Battle of Hue was one of the bloodiest battles in the entire war. There was the Battle of Khe Sanh, in which a Marine regiment and some Army units were trapped on a mountaintop near the Laotian border. Casualties were completely misrepresented there. We were told that there might be a dozen or so fatalities of Americans. Ended up being more than 1,000. That was a standoff. Our troops were finally evacuated. Senator McCarthy of Minnesota had entered the contest seeking the Democratic nomination in December of 1967 and was picking up momentum. His chief rival was, of course, Lyndon Johnson. Johnson barely won the New Hampshire primary. And in a forthcoming Wisconsin primary, he was running a distant third behind Eugene McCarthy and Hubert Humphrey. So on March 31st, as I'm playing bridge at home after a long day at work, Lyndon Johnson comes on and all of a sudden alerts us all, I'm not going to seek the Democratic nomination this year. I have other duties looking after the war. And immediately that changed the dynamics of the entire campaign. Soon afterwards, Senator Robert Kennedy, at that time a senator from New York, announced his candidacy and was off and running. Then we had the assassination of Martin Luther King on April the 4th by James Earl Ray. And that's worth, look at that in Wikipedia and other sources. James Earl Ray is a mysterious figure who shows up, is finally arrested in London, and has a number of passports in his possession, British and Canadian passports. How did that happen? On the weekend following the MLK assassination, I was supposed to be at the Pentagon in DC to discuss my forthcoming military deployment. So I flew to Washington, arrived in National Airport, and as I looked out on the city, there were fires in numerous locations. The bus service was shut down, there were no taxis, so I walked to the Pentagon, and the colonel I was to meet was not there, and I was told to go back home. An eventful time indeed. Bobby Kennedy was doing well in his competition with Senator McCarthy, won the California primary, On June the 5th, in the Ambassador Hotel in LA, he was shot and died the following day. We remember Sirhan Sirhan, who's still alive and seeks release from prison once a year. At the time of Kennedy's assassination, Hubert Humphrey led the delegate count, 560. Kennedy had almost 400, and McCarthy had 258. And it was against this background that the Democratic Convention took place in Chicago, August 26th to 29th. The convention location was lined with National Guard troops with bayonets, and there were rows of barbed wire around the entire convention site. And we'll remember the almost the mobster act-like actions of Mayor Daley. And it was at that convention that there were 5 contested delegations from the South. Mississippi we knew about from the Edelman memoir, but Texas, Georgia, Alabama, and North Carolina. The convention eventually nominated Hubert Humphrey. There was a lot of backroom dealing. Lyndon Johnson hated Humphrey by that time and threatened to come back into the race. But Humphrey prevailed and ran on a platform of addressing poverty. There were vague promises to address civil rights. Richard Nixon ran on a law and order campaign. No one talked about the war. And then George Wallace, with Bombs Away Curtis LeMay as his running mate, announced an independent candidacy and eventually carried 5 states and 10 million votes. His campaign floundered when Curtis LeMay said, certainly I'll use nuclear bombs if that's what it takes to win in Vietnam. Just before the election took place, Lyndon Johnson suspended bombing of North Vietnam. In the election, Richard Nixon gathered 301 electoral votes, Humphrey 191, but the popular vote was extremely close. Now, meantime, I'd gone into the Army, and the Army was so short of doctors that I was not sent to basic training. So I was just as likely to salute a hotel doorman or movie usher as a military superior. And during that time, there was a complete disconnect. We were on the air evacuation route from Vietnam, and we continued to get a lot of American casualties at a time when we were told that the Tet Offensive had been ended. So that was my first serious experience with a disconnection between what was actually happening on a battlefield and what we were being told back home. So this is a wonderful memoir, and Verby, thank you for picking it. Otherwise, I would never have known about it, but it awakened some continuing disturbing memories as I look back on that fateful year of 1968.
Cliff, thank you. Hugh?
Ironically, Cliff, 1968 was where I was going to go because I was a junior in college and had lived really, I went through all of my life up until the end of college in a segregated environment. Segregated high school, segregated. The only time I was integrated or had any dealings with African-American kids was when Dad was in the Air Force and we were in preschool together. Everything else, but where I was in Mississippi, and Tom was there and Carol was there and Verby was there, was Clinton, Mississippi, which was right outside of Jackson, Mississippi with Jackson State, not too far down the road from Tougaloo, and not far away from Alcorn A&M. And during that time in 68, I got to know a lot of my college friends from those 3 colleges. And actually sang, our BSU choir actually sang with the Alcorn A&M choir. And so the emotions that I had, and that I continue to have, that's the one thing that I was thinking about throughout this book, all of the emotions that she drew up inside of me, allowing me to remember things that were happening from 1963 through 1970. And how many raw nerves that really still touched. Tom and Carol were gone my senior year. I led a quasi-quiet protest after Religious Education Week. And we had a homecoming. We always had homecoming displays. In my homecoming display, I was in charge of the senior class, and I put under a freedom bell a black hand and a white hand shaking hands. I wish I had a picture to show you, but I don't know that there's a picture that exists because it was not something that our administration at that time was really fond of. So there are a lot of raw emotions that I went through in this, but the one that I got to, and when I was sort of rereading some things today, and Aaron, I want to go back to something that you said about Black Lives Matter. Verby and I and Franklin also have been participating in a challenge that David Cook gave us way back in January, I think, of reading the words and works of M.L. King, especially his sermons. And that has been a fun ride for me because I learned a great deal about just how eloquent, how learned, how spiritual Martin Luther King is or was. And he said something in one of those readings that we talked about in one of our Zoom discussions, talking about obnoxious peace and how it is obnoxious to say that we're going to do things and not do them, to say that we believe in things but really don't practice what we believe. And so what that got me to was, if you have your books, and I hate to read to you because I know you've already read it, but on page 112, bringing back some of that 1968, on April the 5th, 1968, in Cleveland, Ohio, following Dr. King's assassination, Robert F. Kennedy spoke about the mindless menace of violence in America, which again stains our land. And this is a quote, and every one of our lives. It is not, he said, the concern of any one race. The victims of violence are black and white and rich and poor, young and old, famous and unknown. They are most important of all human beings who other human beings loved and needed. No one, no matter where he lives or what he does, can be certain of who will suffer from the senseless action of bloodshed. And yet it goes on and on and on in this country of ours. And then she goes on in the next 2 pages talking about statistics that were alarming in 1999 and would be even more alarming now. And when I read this, I immediately clicked to the last month of our lives. And Colorado and Atlanta, the Atlanta suburbs. And just sort of started thinking, where in the world are we and how are we different than we were in 1968? And I came back to that idea of obnoxious peace. We sort of peacefully accept these things when we ought to be out, as Fannie Lou and the whole group of people that we meet in here are marching against it. And I guess what I remembered in 1968, and Cliff, especially about that convention that I watched all night on TV with the protest and the police actions and that sort of thing, I wrote a 25-page tome to my then girlfriend that I have no idea where that tome is, but it was the anger and the feeling of, how can I do something to prevent this from ever happening again? And I remember condemning older people because there was nothing being done. Unfortunately, I think I now am one of those older people. And this book, I think, for me, is sort of a wake-up call, saying, get out of your sustained acquiescence and do something about it. So I thank Verby also. I'd read this book a long time ago, well, a long time, 2 or 3 years ago, and really enjoyed it just for the people that she met. And my God, who did she not meet? I mean, from Khrushchev down, folks.
It's amazing.
But anyway, I'm going to use this as a slap upside the head to me and a slap on my backside saying, get up and do something.
Okay.
Is that
Aaron,
why you got a hardcover?
That's why I've got the hardcover. It's because I've got a hard head, Cliff.
Aaron has left us. Let me say a couple comments and then we're going to open it up for questions and comments from you. We've covered a lot of different directions, but I wanted to move briefly back to, and you can come back to any of these things we've talked about as well as other things. But I wanted to just briefly comment again about the whole idea of mentors. And in current times, there's so much emphasis placed on when you go to work at a place, there's a tendency to be assigned a mentor and this whole idea of official mentors. But I really like the emphasis places on natural mentors. Those are the people I think that influence the most. And I also liked her response to the question with someone, she said she sometimes asks if a different person of a different gender or different race can be a mentor. And she says, of course they can. All human beings can be mentors to others. All it takes is compassion and understanding and willingness to be a mentor. And her 3 mentors, interestingly enough, as I pointed out in my presentation, you have a Black man, a Jewish man, and a rich white man that were her 3 major mentors. And I found that most interesting because my personal experience, my 3 major mentors of my life were all male. And I got to thinking about that and why it was that way. And I said something to Hugh, and ironically, he commented, and we won't have to go into this right now, but Michael later, that all of his major mentors were females. And it's just interesting the way that happens. It just takes, I think, somehow a clicking, a connection, and the naturalness of it is what makes it work. But at any rate, one other thing I would mention that we haven't talked a whole lot about is her major concern in the book from the beginning. Their major concern was with children, and that she wound up spending so much of her life devoted to children, particularly the Children's Defense Fund. And I think she's probably not gotten enough acknowledgement for that contribution. And I'd really like to place a little emphasis there. And then at this point, I'm just going to open it up for questions or comments from you. And not everybody at once now.
I think, it's really haunting to read this book and to see what happened today with the George Floyd trial. And I think I echo Hugh's concern about what do I do. I think in what she was up to with her life, you really needed mentors to be there, because it's such a difficult struggle and you're really going against the grain. And so I really appreciated that about her. I'm kind of haunted by what I would do if I came across somebody who was being choked by a police officer. Would I jump in there and do something? I wish I had the kind of mentors that would push me in that direction. And we're also looking at the stuff that's going on with Georgia and voter suppression. And, just calling me to, go down and bring water to people that are voting. It's really, I think, nowadays, I think we're we may be called to do something as a result of what we've seen over the last couple of days.
Rick, I think you're so right on this all of it, in particular this voter suppression. We think that that's what one of the things they were fighting for was the right to vote.
Exactly.
And we thought we had made gains there. And in some ways we did, but now we're trying to reverse all those gains.
Yes.
Many gains have been reversed.
Yes.
The schools were successfully desegregated. They were resegregated gradually over a period of decades, and hardly any comment about that.
Yeah.
But I think it's a really haunting book. I'm going to have to think about it.
Do you think that she thought of these folks as mentors, or is it again in retrospect? People impact on you and you really don't think about it until years later. When I think about mentors for me, there was a high school counselor, a woman who had a tremendous impact on my going to college. Both of my parents were unschooled, if you will. And then my first employer, my first manager that I worked for was a woman, and she was extremely helpful in my career. And then early in my life, my dad. There were things that I learned from him that I really never thought about until, until I was, as you said, until I was an old man, which I am now.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's very clearly, memoir suggests the retrospect aspect of it. It's a memoir of mentors. And I doubt that she did fully recognize the influence. I don't think most of us do. It's only looking back that I've realized a lot of things that a lot of people that I owe debts to.
What is your perspective aren't you a native Mississippian?
I am.
What is your perspective on the whole segregation and everything that happened as living there and being a part of the community?
Well, as I said in my presentation, boy, was I so ignorant, so naive growing up. I had no, real awareness at all until college. I never had a real conversation with a Black person until after I had graduated from college. So it was, it was an awakening for me. And as I started seeing the things happening around me and not understanding them, it became quite a struggle for me. And there was the struggle of family and the struggle of what I felt to be right. And there were some conflicts as a result. Some tough times.
Somebody just said, that things had changed and then they're changing back. I was the first affirmative action officer at Argonne National Laboratory in 1963. And part of my assignment, part of my job, I decided that I was going to visit a large number of the historically Black colleges and universities. And I came home from one of my trips and I said to my wife, I said, you know, I don't know how we're ever going to make progress except one at a time. And she said to me, Irv, that's right. That's the only way that we're going to make progress. And I said, you know, that's going to take millennia. If in fact, that may be even a short estimate. And you know, things have not gotten a whole lot better. And just watching that trial today, my stomach was just turning. And you know, we have not grown. We have not grown in understanding or acceptance or involvement. You know, Hugh was saying he's got to do something, and I agree. We need to do something. And you know, what can we do? And speculation is not. You know, we need to do something. But I don't know what that something is.
I kept thinking of parallel universes all the way through this. When I heard Burley speak, you and I are on the same age page and some of the same experiences and that sort of thing. And then with all this going on, I think as I read this book, I kept going back and thinking this was going on while I was living my life. And I never saw any of this. Where was I? I came from a well-educated family. My parents were moderately liberal politically and that sort of thing. And I never knew this was happening. And so but that's all right. I know more now. That's what makes it, at least there's a chance, because once you start reading and talking, then there's a chance.
I think the most important thing we can do is wait 15 years. Then our children and grandchildren will be in the minority, and we can see if a place can be found for us.
The thing is, I'll be 100.
You will be old.
That's what's going to make real change, I think. That's where the real change is going to come.
Well,
Majority are people of color.
I'm going to speak up partly because Hugh has used mine and Carol's names, and we're both native Mississippians also. I'm 74, but I was an Army brat. I lived a lot of places overseas and had been in Alaska 57 to 60. And after living in the state of Washington, my father retired, and I went to high school and then college in Mississippi. And I'm telling you, it was a cultural shock for me to go from integrated schools up north in the Pacific Northwest, Alaska, and then military. And I'm not so sure that Cliff would encourage the Enlightenment aspect of the military, but I'm telling you, it's probably the better half of my education.
Yeah.
And a lot of what I got acquainted with and who I played ball with, who I was in class with, and whether it's blacks, Jews, Hispanics, Filipinos, particularly in Tacoma, I could go on and on. But that parallel universe is a fascinating phrase for, I think, all of us when we get caught in our cultural captivities. And I think we're all vulnerable to that. And as I went through all the experiences, this is so autobiographical for me, and I think for all of us in our respective ages, to have read this and think about where we were when. This was a remarkable book, particularly the first 180 pages I thought were wonderful. It lost some gravitas for me after that, but
got too preachy, didn't it?
yeah, it really became too preachy. But I also want to
go ahead. I'm on a phone call. Go ahead.
Unacknowledged participants here at this point, I think Franklin McCauley is on this And Franklin is an example to me of what can be done in terms of participation and speaking up, and maybe more than one-on-one, but it's all of the above. And I deeply appreciate the experience and this conversation.
I won't tell them about it. Yes, I thought about it.
Tom, you're nice to mention. My wife is beside us, Teresa. Verby was very nice and invited Teresa and me to join, even though we hadn't read the book. I've heard us.
They voted against having you attend, Franklin.
Say it again.
I voted against you attending.
Well, I knew that. And what I wanted to say was one of the smartest things I heard was from Irv, and I'm amazed at that. But it is true. Irv said looking back was when he was able to see his mentors. Boy, has that been true with me. Looking back, I can see people who had the tremendous effect on me. But there's something else, Tom, that thing about parallel universe. What Teresa and I found, no, I'll speak for me. Teresa can speak for herself. She's hiding over here beside me. What we found when we got back to Chattanooga, and most of you know Chattanooga Connected, and we found that a lot of our white friends had no black friends at all. None, zero. Didn't know anybody. We'd say, this is 2010, who are your black friends? Friends. Yeah, people who are black who are friends of yours. I don't have any black friends. But one of the things I'd found was I didn't have any kind of success with certain white people, most white people, explaining the black experience. They did not get it. I could say systemic racism. Oh boy, that was a lost cause. It's still a lost cause. And that's why Teresa and I and Mel Cooper and Eleanor Macaulay Cooper, my cousin, that's why we started Chattanooga Connected in 2013, to get black and white people together so that white people had black people talking to them. And that has made so much, and the model for me was, and several of you have said it, the model for me was growing up racist on the Macaulay campus, seeing the workers. They were nice, they were fine, they were coloreds, Dad being racist, mother being racist, loving Christian people. Mother says to me, Franklin, Jesus doesn't require us to integrate. I was 14 years old. Oh, well, Jesus doesn't require us to. She cried over that, by the way, years later, apologized, cried, and so did my father. So did my father 60 years later. But it was two black kids talking to me in Memphis, Tennessee. A friend of mine, a fraternity friend, who became a mentor to me, changed my life by getting 70 white kids to talk to 30 black kids on a Sunday afternoon in Lemoyne College in Memphis, Tennessee. And it was these two black kids. I didn't want to talk to them. I didn't want to hear them. I didn't want to be there, but my friend had embarrassed me in front of the whole crowd to be there. And all of a sudden, when this one black kid starts talking, with 70 whites, 30 blacks, would divided up into 7 and 3 in little rooms, 10 little rooms. And these two black kids three, but I don't remember him, black girl, black boy. He starts talking. They start talking with each other and then with other people. I didn't talk. I sat back. I didn't want to hear them. I realized all of a sudden they're smarter than me. And here's what I did. I'm the son of the headmaster of Macaulay School, and these two colored kids smarter than I am, and my father doesn't know it. My mother doesn't know it. And that friend of mine getting me in that circumstance, and then the conversation that follows, and suddenly, and my good friend talking about the war, the Vietnam War, we were talking about World War II. And suddenly I realized that my uncles, one of whom was at Pearl Harbor when it was bombed, he lived through it. My uncles, who fought in World War II, could do anything they wanted to back in the States. And his uncles, as he described it, spent their money at the store. And then he said to me, Franklin, you know where we ate lunch? I said, no, I don't know where you ate lunch. He said, we got on a bus and rode 2 miles out of town to Colortown before my two uncles, who had just back from the war, World War II, could eat lunch. It changed me that second. that second. It took 1 second for me to see it. And I cried the rest of the night in the dorm and dropped out of college the next day. Because, well, that's the kind of experience when you say, what can we do? And I agree, what can we do? I think what Teresa and I think we can do best, for a while we did it with a lot of people, 1,600 people through our living room in 6 years. Before the COVID, we turned to smaller groups. When we all get back together, please, whenever that'll be, small groups in your own home, black and white friends, bringing people together, some white friends who may have never been with any black people. And I really think that's the best thing we can do. And Irv, I still love you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Frank.
That's awesome.
Any other comments or questions? Or reactions?
Well, you know, Verby and the rest of you folks who talk about growing up in Mississippi, I grew up in the Bronx, and it was no different in the Bronx.
Yeah.
It was parallel communities, and we had absolutely no contact.
Really?
The schools that I went to grade school and junior high school, and if my life depends on it, I cannot remember a single black student. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until I went to high school, which was an open enrollment school in a far part of the Bronx that I had to take an elevated train to, that I saw black students. I didn't know they went to school. I never thought about it.
But I understand that, because that's exactly the way. It never occurred to me, because I didn't see them, you know, I just didn't see them around. I just didn't think about it. It was just.
I forgot to mention the Bronx because Leo Metrovich played third base when I was playing first base, and the Colonel's son, Jimmy Jones, who's black, played second base. So thank you.
Irving, I'd like to tell I'm going to try to tell a real quick little story, okay? Out of Amory, Mississippi, near Tupelo, near the Alabama line, is where I was growing up. My dad was an Ole Miss graduate, and so I was going to summer school in the summer of 1963. But in the fall of 62, I remember being on the phone with a friend, and Ross Barnett was bringing the troops into Ole Miss so that James Meredith could enter the school. And I remember telling a friend, it just sort of feels like the end of the world to me, you know, that I was so upset about just what was happening at Ole Miss. And the next summer I go to summer school as a 17-year-old. And I'll always remember this. I was just out milling around, going from one building to another, seeing all these white students who were pretty serious going into their building. And there was James Meredith going into his building. And I just could not believe that no one was paying any attention to him, or I mean, I didn't get the idea anybody was upset or whispering or pointing. He was just doing what the rest of us were the next summer after that fall of having the troops in at Ole Miss. Wow.
Well, one of the readings that we did in the MLK readings recently was one where, as you mentioned, talked about obnoxious peace. We was talking about when Lucy Authorine was admitted to Alabama, and there was just horrendous violence and reaction, you know, throwing eggs at her, just all sorts of things going on. And the question was then, what are we doing? So finally they decided to force her to leave. You know, in order to have peace, we've got to have her leave. And so that's what Martin Luther King Jr. talked about. That's what he called obnoxious peace. Okay, you have peace in Alabama now, but at what cost? And that's the kind of thing that that we have to think about. And it's hard for us, I think particularly for us older folks, to think, you know, what can I do? I really did think with great admiration of Edelman, still at 80, was I say 80 years old out there? 81 out there marching. And I thought, okay, you know, and her little statement, her statement over and over, okay, just do it little at a time, one by one, day by day, do what you can do. You don't have to set the world on fire. You don't have to be, what I loved is she says, you don't have to be an MLK. And she says, you just have to be willing to do what you can do.
Right. And those of us who have focused on 0 to 3 and some of the early literacy and then learning from her what all that means and the effects and the pipeline to prison. You know, I've quoted her for years. So she has had so much more influence, you know, on me, and she would never know that, you know, so she has meant so much to so many without realizing how fully she has influenced us. Because she has such memorable quotes, you know, from all of that.
Drop her a note.
That's true.
Oh, what can I do? Drop her a note.
She was actually more generally known during the Clinton years. She's a good friend of the Clintons and has been for a long time. And during the Clinton years, I think everyone heard more about her and heard her quoted more often, and she had more of a public presence during those years. Because I remember that.
I need to drop out. Thanks, everybody. This has been just a phenomenal conversation.
Yes,
This is a great group. But thanks again.
Thanks, Herb.
Bye.
It is time for us to be coming to a close, but does anyone have another quick comment or question they wish to propose? Are we
I
ready?
just can't believe how these folks can actually think that the voting law they passed in Georgia is good. It's like somebody pulled their eyes closed, they lost their minds, and people, you try to talk this with people like, but they have to do it. No, they don't. It's so wrong on all levels. It's so painful.
I don't know.
It's so painful.
But I don't know what's what. I don't know what's
right. And the right to vote is so precious. And if you have, you know, all your friends who've been in the Army and the Marines and fought for that freedom, and now just because we're just big old mean people, we can take it away. It's just so awful. But I appreciate all your insights and Verby and everybody for getting this together. It's been special this summer to have this, especially this time, spring and winter and summer coming up. But thank you all.
Well, thanks to all of you who have supported us and kept us going during these times. And do be looking forward to next year. I won't go behind Aaron's back and report what he's thinking about doing, but I think he'll be really excited about it. And so look out for the news of next year's Take 5. There should be 5 sessions and it should be live sessions.
Good.
But
thank you.
Thanks for your help in keeping this going this year. Great to see all of you. And
bye. Good night. Thank you. Bye. Thank you all.
Her name is Susan, and that's all I know.